Wow, it is such an honor to be a part of this amazing lineup of speakers and to present what I think is some really cool information about golf and psychology and golf traumas for you today. We are all linked by our golf traumas in this room. And today I'm going to share with you what is a golf trauma, how does it start, how is it stored in your memory, how do you recover from it, and how can it be treated. And we'll look at some recent research that I conducted with 2 LPGA professionals on how I help them overcome their anxiety and performance through the treatment of their golf traumas. Several years ago, I decided that the best way that I could help my students was to look at them more from the inside out instead of the outside in, to understand what their experiences were like, what baggage they brought to the lesson tee, what makes them tick, and what's the intersect between their personal life and their golf life. And that set me on a stage to earn my doctorate in clinical psychology and become licensed as a therapist. We are all linked by our traumas in this room. Now, our traumas might be different in the severity and the scope, the context, the time of occurrence, the level of disruption, but we all have that in common. It's important to remember that looking at somebody from the outside in, we really don't have an idea on what's going on in their personal life and how they bring their personal life to the lesson tee, and what we may inadvertently do during coaching that triggers those traumas that can create a psychological and emotional disruption. I'll start off with my own trauma story. As a small girl growing up in the Midwest, sort of a poster child for the ADM model, no early specialization, I played every sport possible. It was pre-participation trophies, so when I lost, I lost. And when I won, I won. And to be able to experience those normal up and downs were a really good baseline to build resilience and to experience the emotions that come with those failures and those losses. And as I continued into my golf journey through high school, I found myself a little bit more in the spotlight, sort of a big fish in a small pond. And as newspaper articles came out and interviews came out, I started to have more perceived pressure of what it was like to perform. And my first big golf trauma occurred my senior year in high school, as I was touted to win the Missouri State High School Championship. And everything was going my way until the very last hole, when I fired a triple bogey and secured a runner-up finish. My dream of being the state champion was crushed. The emotions I felt were intense. Tons of tears were shed, and I was consoled by my coach and my parents and my friends and family. But I had to pick myself back up and look into the next phase of my journey as I entered into the collegiate ranks. And as a full scholarship athlete at FSU, I was really excited to see what the next 4 years would hold for me. But I sort of transitioned into this being small fish in a big pond. And of course, golf brought my normal highs and lows, as it does for all of us. And my next big trauma occurred my senior year at the NCAA championships. And I found myself after the first round in one of the lead groups. Interestingly enough, the same occurrence happened just 4 years later from high school, where the same outcome occurred. And I then had very poor performances thereafter and worked myself down the leaderboard. So interesting, just 4 years later, the same thing happened. Well, we are more than just our athletic performances. We also have personal lives. And on April 18th, 2006, my next big trauma occurred when the house that I was living in Palm Springs burned down. And I was left with literally the clothes I was wearing that day. Everything was gone. Golf clubs, clothes, personal affects, memorabilia, trophies, just the clothes that were on my body that day. And from that experience, I cycled into depression and feelings of worthlessness and a distorted belief that maybe I wasn't good enough, maybe I wasn't capable of having good things in my life, and I wasn't a good player, and maybe I didn't fit with golf. And it took my own personal healing to close up those wounds and heal from it and reinvent myself and build my career and play better golf than I could have ever imagined, playing in 7 LPGA Tour majors as a club pro and playing in 2 PGA professional championships. We all have our own stories. We never know how it impacts somebody when we look at them only from the outside in. So I'm going to turn the tables now and ask you a little bit about your golf traumas. And I want to throw out a few statements. And if this statement applies to you, I'm going to ask for a little early morning audience participation. I want you to stand up but remain standing. Have you ever experienced from golf a distressing memory about a failure on the golf course? Almost got most of the room, but hang in there, I got more for you. Have you ever had dreams or nightmares about a failed performance, a bad shot, a shanked shot, or a fear of it happening again? Have you ever had flashbacks about a poor shot? Have you ever experienced anxiety or nervousness when in a similar situation as a failed performance? Have you ever had intrusive thoughts about the failed performance or negative feelings? Intrusive thoughts are those pictures or images that flash into your mind at the times that you don't want them to occur. Have you ever attempted to avoid those negative feelings or that thought, maybe through unhealthy coping skills like smoking on the golf course or drinking excessively on the golf course or anxiety talking? And finally, have you ever just attempted to avoid the situation entirely, like you don't sign up for an event or you don't play that particular golf course anymore, or you vow to never hit that golf club again? Look around the room and see how we are all linked by our golf traumas. What's interesting is this game brings us through so many highs and lows. We as coaches and for our players need to know how to deal with this stuff. What's also interesting is this is actually the criteria for post-traumatic stress disorder. Now, that's not to say that all of you in this room have PTSD from golf. Maybe some of you do. But it just shows how much our brain and our body goes through a golf competition. Thank you so much for participating. You can have a seat. As coaches, we have to be able to deal with different types of performance disruptions in ourselves as players and in our students and their careers. And some of the things that you need to have in your toolbox to deal with would be communication issues. We all know how trying it can be working with some junior parents. But caddies and players, coaches and players, we need to have the skills to handle setting appropriate goals and realistic and smart goals. Being able to regulate emotions. Golf can bring really big emotions to our system. How to build confidence. How to teach people how to concentrate, particularly in this day and age. Ability to handle pressure. Any anxiety-based disorders, such as the yips. Work-life balance, and does that really even exist? And then our focus today, athletic traumas or adverse life events. We need to have toolboxes to be able to handle and deal with these common performance themes. So to visually see what a golf trauma looks like, I've put together a compilation video for you to view. I will share that there are some very upsetting images in this video, so just view at your own risk. Take a look. As you had a bad day, you take it one down, you sing a sad song just to turn it around. You say you don't know, you tell me don't lie, you work and a smile and you go for a ride. You had a bad day, the camera don't lie, you're coming back down and you really don't mind. You had a bad day, you had a bad day. Now, hopefully I didn't vicariously traumatize you by showing you that video. But do you find it interesting, for example, Jordan Spieth in 2016 and what occurred on the 12th hole at the Masters, the same thing happened 1 year later in 2017. It's interesting. So what is trauma? It's a deeply disturbing event that interferes with a person's sense of control, and it can inhibit their ability to integrate life's circumstances into their reality. Now, trauma is broken up into two categories. We have large T traumas and we have small T traumas. And large T traumas are those bigger events that could create a diagnosis of PTSD. They're terrorist attacks, they are airplane or car accidents, tsunamis and earthquakes. These are things that we typically don't see occur on the golf course, but we experience in our world. Small T traumas, on the other hand, are the things that we might call adverse life events. These things occur in our life at more frequency. They can be getting fired from a job, divorce, legal trouble, financial trouble, mishitting shots in competition that you really care about, having a failed performance. And as these small T traumas start to build up in our system, they can create symptomology for the player. Development of the yips, anxiety-based disorders, decreases in self-esteem, lowered confidence, increased fear, self-doubt. As these things build up into our system, they then start to create performance disruptions. So we have to be able to find a way to heal them, cope with them, and put them away. The NCAA states that nearly every collegiate athlete in their career will have a disappointing loss at some point in their life. And research indicates that nearly every human being on Earth will have at least one trauma in their life, but it's more than likely they will have 3 or more. Now, for those in my peer group from ages 22 to 40, we have experienced 2 large traumas together, the events of September 11th and the global pandemic. And for those in different age groups, you have experienced those 2 plus many more. Now, how do these golf events or traumas get stored in our memory? We need to understand that piece so that we can work on healing them. Well, as you go about your day, things that are important, that the brain deems important, will be stored in short-term memory. And as you go to sleep at night, that information will be filed in long-term memory so that we can learn from it and adapt and try to keep ourselves safe. So for example, if you touched a hot stove during the day, you'd probably want to remember that so you don't go around touching a hot stove again. So that information gets filed in long-term memory, and it occurs through the 4th sleep cycle called REM cycle. That's rapid eye movement. If you've ever watched somebody sleep and they're going through that stage, you can actually see their eyeballs moving behind their eyelids. And that's when the hippocampus is taking the information from short-term memory and filing it into long-term memory. Sometimes an event is too overwhelming that storage cycle gets disrupted. Memories are then grouped into networks. And I can trigger those memory networks with cues. So for example, if I were to say, roses are red, you might respond with, violets are blue. Why didn't you talk about daisies or tulips? Well, because you accessed a memory network and you pulled out roses are red, a nursery rhyme that you've heard ever since being a child, and then I triggered you and you automatically responded with violets are blue. So it's sort of an automatic response. If I were to say apples, you might respond with oranges. Why didn't you say kiwi or mangoes? Well, in our language, we tend to compare apples to oranges. And so I triggered that memory network, and as I cued in with that word, you had an automatic response. Our memories work that way too. If I were to cue up a 4-foot putt on Bermuda greens, Your brain then accesses its long-term memory and thinks about all the times that you've put it on Bermuda greens and how to read the grain, how to hit it harder or softer depending on the grass. And all of these memories are just stored in these neat little files and networks in your brain. Sometimes the traumas that we experience, though, they're too overwhelming for the brain to process, and again, that cycle gets disrupted. And to better understand this, we need to look a little bit about how the brain's organized and how it responds to these overwhelming experiences. So I'm going to show you with a little handy model, pun intended. Go ahead and raise your right hand so you can see how your brain operates in these situations. When we can see what's happening in the brain, it gives us a better opportunity to change what the brain does. So the wrist going into the palm represents the spinal cord and the brainstem. This is going to be the inner workings of your brain. So if you fold your thumb in, this is called the subcortical area, and if you wrap your fingers over your thumb, this would be the cortex. So here's your brain. Now, if we look on the inside of the brain, the thumb is going to represent the limbic system. This is responsible for the emotional regulation, arousal, and our fight, flight, and freeze responses. The thumbnail would represent the amygdala, and this is the part that holds the emotional components of your golf memories. As we wrap our hands over, we have the cortex, kind of the wrinkly part of the brain. That helps you perceive the outside world and make sense of it. And as you turn your brain to the side, the front part, the knuckles, represents your prefrontal cortex. This is your executive functioning center. This helps you make decisions, helps you pull the 8-iron instead of the 7-iron because you're downwind. When something becomes too overwhelming for the capacity of your brain to process, that limbic system deep down in your hand, it becomes overwhelmed and highly aroused. And it causes us to not think clearly. We might put our foot in our mouth. We might say the wrong thing at the wrong time. We pull the wrong club. We make stupid mistakes on the golf course. Well, what happens is that limbic system is so highly aroused, we have such difficulty coping with it that we literally flip our lid. We can't think clearly. We can't perform the way that we'd like to perform. Well, those trauma memories that we experience, they are also linked together. And those can be stimulated and triggered and cued. So for example, if you were winning your PGA Section Championship to try to qualify for PPC, and you ended up having a failed performances, that's going to get stored in a memory network. And then all the possible scenarios linked up to that will be networked together. Hooked tee shots, balls in the water, shanked shots, bladed shots. So you now have this ripe memory network of all those golf traumas. Now, the brain is certainly capable of processing upsetting events. It does so all the time. What's upsetting and traumatic to me may not be upsetting and traumatic to the next person. But when it becomes too overwhelming for the brain to process, that's when it becomes stuck. It doesn't get filed from short-term memory to long-term memory. Well, a stuck memory then becomes triggered. And when you're put in a like or similar situation, then your body is going to respond in a very similar way to the traumatic situation. Now, looking at this photo behind me, this is Lexi Thompson at the ANA. And we've seen Lexi over the years have some putting difficulties. Well, this is about a 2-foot putt that was valued at about $1 million. Not just purse money, but all the rewards that come after it. That can be traumatic for a player to miss a 2-foot putt for $1 million. And then we continually see performance disruptions in that area, particularly in her game over the years. So how can we heal these golf traumas? How can we get them unstuck? One of the strategies that I use is a technique called EMDR, eye movement desensitization reprocessing. It basically represents that REM cycle of sleep when the eyes are moving back and forth to consolidate short-term to long-term memory. And when a golfer is doing this in a waking state, in a calm and a safe place, they're able to desensitize the intensity of that stuck memory. They're able to move it along and allow the brain to naturally process that so it can get filed into long-term memory. EMDR is a psychotherapy technique that says all of our performance disruptions and golf troubles, they really are stemmed from the maladaptive encoding of these stressful life events, and the incomplete processing of those events create those sources of triggers for our performance disruption. The eye movements in the treatment are actually a form of bilateral stimulation. What that means is the right and left hemisphere of your brain is activated, and it's helping digest that trauma. We use bilateral stimulation naturally and organically in every part of our life. As I'm walking right now, I'm stimulating the left and right hemisphere of my brain. If you've ever had a challenging interaction with maybe a student at work, and on your lunch break, you maybe walk around the facility and you're just kind of thinking about the scenario, after that walk, you might find yourself feeling just a little bit better. That natural process of walking and thinking about the difficult situation can help digest it. I like to go for a run. If I had a really stressful day or an occurrence that happened with a student, I'll go for a run and I'll think about that event and I'll certainly feel better because the memory and the situation has had an opportunity to digest and process into my brain. So how does EMDR actually work? Well, when a trauma memory in golf is stored, there's 3 ingredients that are extremely important for us to look at. We have the entire experience, but there's typically a worst picture of that entire experience. There's a belief that gets stored. Maybe I'm not good enough, I'm a horrible putter, I'm a bad wedge player. And then there's a feeling in the body that is stored as well. So when a golfer is cued up to think about the worst part of the memory, the belief that they have about themselves, and the location of where they feel that uncomfortable sensation in their body, as their eyes are moving back and forth in the treatment, they're actually taxing their working memory. It creates a distance from the original traumatic memory, making it less vivid, discharging the emotional components of it, maybe making it fuzzy, and allowing the brain to naturally digest that trauma. It doesn't erase the memory by any means. The individual still recalls what happened, but they can recall it as, oh, it was this thing that happened to me, but it doesn't define my life, and it doesn't bring up any uncomfortable emotions when I think about what happened. The eye movements, or other forms of bilateral stimulation, which I'll share with you, they just represent what happens in that REM sleep cycle, just in a conscious state. So let's look at 2 case studies that I published where I worked with professional women golfers on decreasing anxiety so that their performances were better and clearing out their emotional traumas. Now, in any research study, we have to have forms of measurement. So in this case, I looked at anxiety to measure and confidence, which is the opposite of anxiety. And I looked at cognitive anxiety and somatic anxiety. Cognitive anxiety is like the rumination and the thoughts that you have going on in your brain. And the somatic anxiety is what is felt in the body. I also looked at the level of distress that the memory caused the player. And I looked at the intensity, if they were to give it a numerical rating, the intensity of that memory. So participant A was a 30-year LPGA Tour veteran. It had a fairly successful career, but as she was moving on into this new phase of her career, she really wanted to overcome the feelings and the uncomfortableness of anxiety that she had when she still teed it up. And so some of the feelings that she was working on were shame, isolation, embarrassment. And her traumatic memory occurred when she was a junior golfer, and she was on a national team, and the team went out to have a putting contest, and as she's around her peers, she's going through this putting contest, and she's constantly missing putts. And then she got bullied and made fun of a little bit, and that memory stuck out to her and carried with her for 3 decades, that it was embarrassing, that she didn't feel like she belonged, and it led to what she linked to some anxiety, performance anxiety. So that was the memory that she wanted to process. The second participant was a mini tour player with 10 plus years of experience, and she was working on trying to qualify in that top 10 to get into full exempt status on the LPGA. And her trauma memory that she selected was at the finals of Q School, getting into the top 10 and having to wait for a few more groups to come in. And as a few more groups did come in, it bumped her to 11th. And her dreams of having full status disappeared. She also wanted to work on performance anxiety, but she had some different feelings of self-doubt and some worthlessness. So both of these participants went through EMDR to try to heal those golf traumas. And of course, as we took some measurements, now this is generally the slide where the people who are non-graph people, you tend to tune out. I can get like that too, but hang in there because I have a special slide just for you. As we look at the treatment results, the top half is before treatment and the second half is after treatment. The top half, I measured anxiety at 2 times in their life. A quiet time throughout their day, so maybe like right after breakfast or before bed when they were generally calm, we looked at anxiety. And then right before they went onto the golf course to perform. Scores of 36 are high, scores of 9 are low and normal anxiety that we can cope with and perform with. So both participants had moderate anxiety in the 20s, high teens. And confidence was fairly moderate too, in the low 20s and high teens. Now, after treatment, both cognitive and somatic anxiety decreased, went down into 13 and 12, 11, so the scores drastically reduced, and confidence went up. In fact, participant A actually maxed out at confidence in 36 right before she went into a competition. Participant B's confidence stayed about the same, but I'll share that after she completed treatment, she went out and won her first Symetra Tour event. As we looked at the impact of their events, so the gray is before and the yellow is after treatment, both participants deemed the impact of the events pretty distressing to them, and after treatment, significantly declined. Their level of distress on a scale from 1 to 10, 10 being the highest level of distress, went down to a 0 after their golf memory was healed. And their belief system, feeling that they were good enough and able to perform the way they wanted to, was pretty low pre-treatment and skyrocketed after treatment. So here's a slide for my non-graph people. What happened? Anxiety went down, confidence increased. By being able to discharge those golf traumas, no matter how long they held on to them, 3 decades or 2 years, by just being able to process and heal from those psychological scars, they were able to then perform and feel like they experienced less anxiety and had happier and healthier performances. So you might be curious, like, how might this work for me? So I've built a little practicum for us all to try. Now, this is completely voluntary. You don't have to if you don't want to, but we can engage in this together. We might actually be setting a world record for the most amount of golf pros in one room to do an EMDR intervention on a golf trauma. I want you to think about a mildly upsetting or distressing event. Now, keep in mind, we're not going to be able to heal these deep traumas within a 2-minute practicum, but something mild and sort of irks you. It could be a bladed shot, could be a chunked wedge, a hook out of bounds. From that memory, I want you to select a picture that is the most distressing. What defines that memory in terms of a Polaroid snapshot? Once you have that snapshot, select the words that best go with that picture that identify a negative belief you might have about yourself. Could be, I'm not good enough, I'm an awful putter, I suck at wedges, I'm never going to be able to qualify. And now I want you to notice where you feel it in your body. So as you recall that memory, do you have sensations in your stomach like you got punched in the gut? Is your throat tightening? Are your shoulders getting tense? Do you have tension in your jaw? When you hold these 3 things in mind, the picture that identifies the worst part of the memory, the sensation that you have in your body, and the negative belief that you hold with it, You're going to be following a ball on the screen behind me with your eyes. Now, keep in mind you're going to hear some sounds as well. This can be tough. You might find yourself distracted, completely normal. You might lose sight of those 3 ingredients. That's completely normal too. But just try to gently bring back those 3 ingredients in your mind as you follow the ball across the screen. This will be about 2 minutes. Now, that might have been tough. You might have found yourself distracted. There's a lot going on. That's the point. It's taxing your working memory. So as you're bringing up the components of this mildly upsetting event, by adding in distraction, you're able to process that in a safe and calm and conscious state. And so now as you go to sleep tonight, your brain has a better opportunity to take that information and file it into long-term memory so that we can use it adaptively and that we can learn from it. Now, of course, in this 2-minute demo, no one's psychological wounds have been healed. However, through repeated exposures and more sets of working through this, the golfer will feel that the image becomes less vivid, more fuzzy. The sensations in their body start to decrease and become a lot more comfortable. And then they're able to just recall this memory as this thing that happened to me, but it doesn't stimulate or trigger any negative reaction in my body. Now, the eye movements are just one way for bilateral stimulation to occur. There's another way through tapping. We talked about walking and running are also forms of bilateral stimulation, but tapping is a form that I help my clients use to do sort of the opposite of EMDR in terms of processing old negative stuff. We can actually create a future template for how they would like to perform. So if I have an event coming up and I want to set a template for my success and say, well, you know, I'd really like to feel more confident in this scenario, or I'd really like to feel calm and patient, I want to set the stage for that, then I can tap in how I would like to be into my nervous system. And tapping just merely looks like crossing my arms and tapping my shoulders back and forth. We see Prince Harry here in the image working through what's called a butterfly hug. I also have little electronic tappers that would go into the golfer's hands that vibrate back and forth. Or just sitting in your chair, you can just tap on the tips of your knees. Now, with my clients who use tapping while on the golf course, they may have like a mildly upsetting hole, maybe they double bogeyed, and before they go to the next hole and they're having the other players tee off, they might be standing, squeezing their feet in their shoe back and forth to desensitize the intensity of the emotion that they were experiencing. In preparation for competitions, I'll have my golfers set the stage for how they want to perform. So if I was preparing for the PGA Professional Championship, and I know that the qualities that I would like to exhibit might be calmness, patience, or confidence, I can tap those resources into my nervous system so that when I get into that scenario, they would show up. So another practicum, if you'd like to try, completely voluntary. Think about an area of your game that you would like to improve. So maybe it is 4-footers under pressure. Now I want you to think about the qualities that you would need in order to improve that. And not mechanical qualities, but more physical, psychological qualities. Would it be patience? Would it be confidence? Assertiveness in yourself? Once you know what you need, now scan your memory for a memory of when you exhibited those qualities. Maybe there was a time that you made a 4-footer that was a slider and you won a tournament. Once you have the memory of the performance that you wish to happen again, pull out those 3 ingredients. What is the picture of the best thing that happened in that memory? Pull out the positive belief that you have about yourself when you think about that memory. I'm awesome. I'm a great golfer. I hit straight drives all day long. And notice where you feel it in your body. Is there a lightness? Is there a sense of happiness in your heart? When you have those 3 ingredients, the picture of the best part, the positive feeling that you have about yourself, and the positive sensation that you have in your body, cross your arms over your chest, and then just gently tap back and forth with me. Or you can tap the tips of your knees. Holding those 3 pieces in mind, just tap back and forth. At the end, take a deep breath, let it out. You've now taken those qualities that you wish to exhibit and you've tapped them into your nervous system. So now when you get into a like or similar situation, your body responds the way that you had wanted it to. And through repeated sets of this, we can make those resources stronger and we can tap that into our nervous system so that our body automatically responds. Just as I cued you in with apples to oranges, now I get over a 4-foot putt, my body wants to respond with competence and confidence and certainty. So tapping is one way that I'll help clients prepare for their future performances. Now, how you can help your students as golf professionals can be through a variety of forms, not all comfortable, but definitely ways that you can help them overcome their golf traumas and how you can overcome your golf traumas. One of the ways is through exposure therapy, probably the most uncomfortable way to recover from those golf traumas. So if you have a player that has difficulty, we look at the simulator behind me, maybe they see all those bunkers and they get really scared of bunkers being on the left because they tend to hook the ball. You then bring them out onto the golf course and you mimic that situation and you have them work through a variety of shots until they feel like there is less fear being triggered when they're in that situation. At my course, we have a really tough par 3 over water, and oftentimes in the afternoon, I have an old shag bag and I bring my students out there who have difficulty with that hole, and we just hit balls over the water until they overcome that fear. So you can help your students do that through exposure. The next way would be to identify triggers. When you are the expert on yourself at identifying what triggers you, you can then create a prevention plan and use your toolbox a lot quicker. So do you tend to get triggered with first tee jitters? Do you tend to get triggered when the ball's on a tight lie and you have a lob wedge in your hand? What triggers your students, and can they identify when those scenarios occur on the golf course so that you can then help build a plan for, let's use some box breathing during that moment, or let's use a hybrid instead of a high lofted wedge. Create a plan B. The worst thing we can do is keep going through the same plan over and over when it's not working. What do we call the definition of psychosis? Doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. Well, build a plan B within your student's game. When things aren't going well, can you create a 3/4 sawed-off shot where they can just poke it right down the fairway? Do they have a backup swing that when they get really anxious or nervous, they can guarantee that they hit the fairway, similar to like Tiger's stinger? Create a plan B. Certainly now that you know a little bit about EMDR, you can reference some of your more impacted students to an EMDR therapist like myself, a sports psychologist or a sports psychology practitioner who focus in brain activity. And then finally, you can learn a little bit more about tapping. You don't have to be a therapist to use tapping, and there's a fantastic book out there called Tapping In by Dr. Laura Parnell, and she goes through a couple of different scenarios where you can run yourself through a future template for how you'd like to be for different phobias and different anxieties. So if you have a fear of flying, fear of public speaking in front of your colleagues and friends, or if you're getting ready for an athletic performance, you can learn about the benefits of tapping to help your students prepare. So from the outside looking in, we may see hip slides and hip sways and over-the-top moves and open club faces. But if we are cognizant of understanding a player from the inside out, we can turn their vulnerabilities into strengths, and we can promote healing for a happier and healthier golf performance. Thank you so much.
Don't you go anywhere. This is my 14th cup of coffee, and after that, I am so calm and collected. I've never been this relaxed in my entire life. A couple of questions for you. First of all, just by a show of hands, I know what a Polaroid snapshot is. There are a lot of you in this audience, no clue, right? Anybody not know what a Polaroid snapshot is? Well, I guess they're making a comeback, right?
Right, well, we could just say an iPhone screenshot.
An iPhone screenshot,
so
right?
So take a screenshot of the best or worst part.
Question for you, and I think it's happened to a lot of us as instructors, and it's a very unique situation. But what about a student who may experience like trauma during a golf lesson? And can you just touch on that quickly from, hey, this is probably, we know the thoughts of the student. How does the instructor coach and recover us? And before you get into that, the one thing, if nobody picked this up, you wouldn't go try a shot on a golf course that you haven't practiced. So the miracle of try this when you're out there, prepare for it. But what if something happens in a lesson?
Definitely, and it certainly has happened, and it might have inadvertently happened without you even knowing it, but if you can pick up on body language and cues, you might see the individual either start to have a big emotional outburst with panic or anxiety, or they completely shut down. That's their fight, flight, or freeze response occurring. And in that moment, it's best to just help them walk away and do something different. So if you engage in a different activity instead of staying in the same activity, you can prevent that issue from getting stuck in their trauma memory network. And so you might say, let's go work on some putting, or go work on one of their strengths so that it sort of disconnects them from the trauma in the moment and allows them to do something else. There's a really fascinating study about individuals who experience trauma. And in this research, if they went to go watch a movie directly after the trauma situation, or they played a video game doing something completely different, the impact of the trauma had less impact in their sensory system right after, because they did something else and created a distraction. So if you traumatize someone in a lesson, have them do something else to kind of protect them so that it doesn't get interfered in their memory network.
That is absolutely awesome. Allison, thank you so much for your time today.
Appreciate it.